Hi guys, so this lesson is on population density, the reasons for areas being densely or less densely populated with people. The opposite of the word density is sparsity, and you'll hear me use that from time to time. When an area is dense, it means it's very crowded, and when an area is sparse, it means it's very empty. And one of your jobs will be to explain the reasons for this being the case. This is the exam question, or a version of the exam question that you're likely to see. You can see that you're being asked to explain why there are different population densities across the world. In this question, we're being asked to refer to both physical and human factors, those being physical, natural factors, and human factors, those that are more controlled by people. A few tips before we even get started on the actual knowledge that you need. Always pay attention to the question structure. You're explaining. That means you're giving reasons. So you're likely to use words like because, or for the reason that, or due to. And also notice that you're being asked for both physical and human factors. Things like that should be a real alarm bell for you when you're answering a question in an exam, because if you fail to take account of one or the other of those two factors, you're not going to be able to score more than half the marks in the question. So let's look at the physical factors first of all, affecting population density. These can be broken down into various subheadings, and you could take notes as you go through this presentation. In warmer climates, there's going to be that's going to impact on the amount of rainfall. So temperate climates means milder climates where there's enough rainfall to provide water. So where it's too hot, it'll be too dry and there won't be enough water for people to live. You could use this to explain why some areas are denser or some areas are sparser. Remember, sparser means less dense. So just be aware that as we go through this presentation, these reasons can be used to explain either density or a lack of density. But the main thing to realize is that the climate controls how much rainfall there is. And in a climate where it is temperate, that means that there's enough rainfall to provide water for drinking. Extreme climates such as the Sahara Desert, the Arctic, the Antarctic, very high mountain ranges such as in the Himalayas, make it difficult for people to live. You need to provide a different reason though. If you were just to say because there's no water for drinking, well, you've already said that in bullet point 1. So this time we've adapted and we've said that the lack of water in the Sahara Desert is going to make it difficult to farm. Notice also that my answer that I'm building tries to be specific by referring to a specific named area on the globe. And once again, in this example, you can see all the pieces of advice I've given you come together. I'm using a specific named example, a specific area in Arctic Canada. The climate makes it difficult to build houses and roads as the ground is frozen for much of the year. The word you use, by the way, for when the ground is frozen for much of the year, which makes it difficult to dig holes basically, is permafrost. And it makes everything from construction of foundations to underground work such as sewerage and other infrastructure to even funerals. Digging any kind of hole in the ground is made very difficult for periods of the year in areas where there is permafrost. Notice the level of development which you need in these answers. You're taking a simple point that a climate is either warm or dry or cold, and you're developing it into a fully formed paragraph. Another example would be that rainforest areas have very low population density as they're uncomfortable to live in due to the humid climate. People tend to avoid areas that are uncomfortable. And due to that humid climate, certain diseases can spread, such as malaria. You cannot just name any disease because not all diseases spread for the same reason. But malaria is a disease that spreads through mosquitoes, and mosquitoes live in those warm, humid climates. That one's a double marker. Now, if you're revising this and you're finding the level of content to be a challenge, this is a good one for you to focus on because it scores 2 marks due to that extended point about disease spreading easily. Still with physical factors, we can also talk about soil. Soil is hugely important to human life. Without good quality soil, of course, we can't grow crops. So, as you can see in point 1, people prefer to live in areas with fertile soils so that crops can be grown. Where there are poor quality soils, and this, again, remember I'm trying to avoid just getting bogged down and repeating myself, I'm trying to add some detail. So for example, on the steep slopes in the hills of northern Scotland, there's not so many crops that can be grown. If I'd simply said in that second bullet point, areas where there are not fertile soils mean that crops can't be grown, that would be a simple repetition of point 1. And therefore I wouldn't get that mark. But because I've added some detail and I've added some value to my second sentence, it can earn me another point. Here again, I have not simply said in hot desert areas the soil is not fertile and so we cannot grow crops, because that would simply be repeating myself from the first bullet point. Instead, I've been specific. I've talked about hot desert areas. I could even name one. That would be an improvement. I could say, e.g. in the Sahara. And I've said something more specific. The soil dries out and turns to dust. It then eventually blows away, making it difficult to grow crops. What's important is that you see how each of these 3 points I've made are in fact different to each other because I've added value to them. Okay. Further physical factors that affect distribution and density are natural resources. Natural resources means things that we can dig out the ground to make money from. For example, oil, and you can see some oil wells being pumped in Texas on the right-hand side of the screen. People tend to live where there are minerals to extract because you can sell them for a profit. So people tend to live near supplies of, for example, oil, coal, shale, natural gas. Natural landscapes with beautiful scenery attract people, tourists and locals for their job opportunities. So some mountainous areas are of course very empty because they are inaccessible and distant. But other mountainous areas, such as the Lake District in northern England, they actually attract higher than usual numbers of people to live in them because the landscape itself is a resource from which you can make money. And of course, where there's no natural resources, that means there will be little industry and therefore less employment opportunities. I'm going to come back to talking about detail again. Compare bullet point 1 to bullet point 3. Now these are both marks that you can score, but you would have to be very careful not just to repeat yourself. In bullet point 1 we point out the basic concept. People tend to live where there are raw materials that you can extract to sell. If you were simply to reverse that sentence and say people don't live where there are no raw materials to extract and sell, that would be a repetition. But that's not what I've done in this third paragraph. What I've pointed out is areas where there are few raw materials means there will be little industry and therefore less employment opportunities. And that's where I'm scoring this mark. I'm expanding upon this initial concept. It's a subtle thing and it's worth spending just a few seconds to have a look at those 2 paragraphs to see how they are different. Because once you've understood how to expand on an initial easier concept, you'll score more marks more quickly. Relief. Relief is a word you might actually see in the exam paper. Relief means how mountainous or how flat an area is. People tend to prefer to live in flat, low-lying areas because it's easier to build on. Steep, mountainous, difficult to access land is difficult to build on for a number of reasons. Those reasons are various, but you could consider the difficulties of getting construction equipment into steeper areas, the difficulties of building foundations, and actually the construction process on a steep slope is harder. The difference that being higher up in mountains would make to the climatic conditions to construction. And of course, areas that are difficult to access are less likely to be built on anyway. All of these things can be summarized in that simple point. But if you're talking about areas being low down or high up or steep or flat, never forget that there's more to say here. A lot of people don't get past that first bullet point. Coastal areas allow trade to take place as ports locate by the sea. If you think about it, almost every major world city is a port. It's actually quite a challenge to find or to name a major world city that is not a port. And that maybe you could try that yourself. There are, of course, examples, but you'll have to think to find them. As I've mentioned, steep slopes make it difficult for machinery to operate. This is an extension of the first bullet point. But also it would make agriculture impossible. And upland, that means mountainous, areas tend to be too cold and wet to grow crops, so therefore few people live there. So there's a few interrelated points there, but I think that coastal one really sits apart as an easy to remember and distinct idea that would be quite easy to revise. Mountainous areas, and here you could visualize the Scottish Highlands, but you could also visualize the more rural, far-flung areas in somewhere like Nepal, are very isolated, and that makes them hard to access. Indeed, there are some parts of Nepal that due to the seasons, due to the colder seasons in the year, become completely shut off and isolated by snow and ice, and makes them impossible to access. And for that reason, less people live there. Now, before we carry on to the human factors, what you should do is pause the video, go back through, make sure you've got a copy of all these key notes, highlight which of those notes you think you're going to pick on. There's certainly no suggestion that you should remember every single physical factor. Instead, pick a couple from each of the subheadings. Pick a couple of climatic factors. Pick a couple of factors that relate to relief. And from those you should build a mind map, and that mind map will be your key to unlocking this question should it come up in your exam. Let's get on to human factors affecting density and distribution. Human factors are, of course, ones to do with the human world. And there are lots of reasons why people live or don't live in areas according to human factors. Let's start off with employment and job opportunities. Urban areas, such as cities, that is an urban area, of course, encourage people to move to them because they have lots of different industries to find work. Once again, I'm going to come to how you are expressing yourself. A poorer answer, but one that is commonly given by National 5 candidates, are candidates that simply say cities have more people because of jobs. Now, I get what that candidate means. I think you probably get what I mean when I've said those words. But I think you can also see that there is a huge difference between me saying cities have higher numbers of people because of jobs, and jobs in different industries in urban areas encourage people to move to find work, as you can see written on the screen. It's about how you express yourself. Always try to fully develop every idea that you go into. Here's another way of saying the same mark. Cities such as Rio de Janeiro have a high population density as there is a variety of job opportunities there. Now, it's really important that you pay attention to this because it's very tempting just to try and say the minimum to score the marks. But if you are going to be revising this, don't waste your time by remembering simply that job opportunities are the important thing and then go away to write a short, poor quality sentence in your test or exam. Instead, be a bit clever about it and fully revise a fully developed sentence, such as one of the ones you see on the screen, so you can definitely secure those marks. It's not much extra work to fully develop a concept, but the level of writing you see on the screen is the standard that is expected. And if you're not writing to that level, you can expect to lose marks. Okay, we've covered job opportunities, making it a reason why cities are more densely populated, but transport and communications are important. Areas which are more accessible, and notice again the use of an example, e.g. the central lowlands of Scotland, tend to have higher population densities. If you compare that to a candidate that simply says areas that are more accessible have more people, you can clearly see why the examiner would give the marks to the person that's written what you see in front of you on the screen. So when you're revising this lesson, you really want to try and pick out these examples I've been using. I've mentioned the Amazon rainforest before, I've mentioned the Sahara Desert, I mentioned Arctic Canada, I mentioned the central lowlands of Scotland. These are the key details you want to be revising. It's not difficult to remember that people live where you find transportation. The difficult bit to remember is the details surrounding that. So when you're highlighting your notes, you want to pick out those details as the important ones. Places with good transport links attract lots more industry to them, which in turn creates employment opportunities. This is a good way of twisting the transportation mark into an additional point, because you're relating it to the reasons why industry and employment locate in an area. Governments obviously have a huge impact upon our lives, and there is no part of the Earth's surface that some government is not responsible for. So government is clearly a factor in controlling why some areas are busier and some areas are less busy. Industries tend to locate where there's government funding available. As a result, people move into these areas for work. Where there's less government funding available, you'll find that employers are less likely to locate there. And another factor would be conflict. In areas like Syria, the population density is falling. It's getting less dense. It's getting, in other words, more sparse, because people are moving away from the war there. Services. When we talk about services, what we really mean are things that make your life more comfortable and easier. And these are obviously reasons why people would choose to live all in one place. This picture of Times Square, I think, summarizes this very nicely. Why would you choose to live in the middle of a highly polluted, dense, concrete urban jungle with high crime rates and lower life expectancies? Well, you choose to live there because of its employment opportunities, because of its industrial opportunities, because it's a coastal location with access to the sea for trade and transport, because of its location to transport opportunities such as airports so you can access the rest of the globe, and because of its famous services. And when we talk about services, we can be talking about its entertainment industry and its tourism industry. These are the reasons people choose to live in New York. As you can see on the screen, I'll let you read it for yourself, but there's a key word in there. New York has a variety of amenities. Where you see this word in your notes, textbooks, and other model answers, what that really means is the kinds of services that you have in your life that make your life of a higher quality. For example, cities tend to have lots of opportunities for education. Universities, colleges and schools. Healthcare is easier to access, jobs are easier to access, and entertainment is easier to access in a city. And these are reasons why cities are more densely populated. Notice again, guys, the quality of the answer. I haven't simply written towns have more people because they have more schools. That's not a developed sentence. That's a lazy, poor quality sentence. Instead, I've said towns and cities, such as London, have lots of services, such as education, but I haven't stopped there. I've said healthcare, jobs and entertainment too. Remember, your exam is a competition, and you're trying to produce the highest quality answer that you can. Okay, our next lesson will be on population growth, and you can tune into that video by clicking on the link on the website.